So, without further ado, I don't think there's anything other housekeeping things I need to do. Robin Ince.
Thanks very much. Hello everyone. Thanks for coming down. I've had a lovely day on the mobile library. It was an absolute joy, and it really was. You could see how much Darren really does love doing his job. I've written so far 8 poems today about the mobile library. I'm not going to do all of them probably, but we don't know how this is going to pan out. So I thought I'd just read the second one. Actually, this was the first one after our first visit. And it was interesting to see in different locations the main desire. Because as the afternoon continued, more people were after bloody murder. But at the beginning of the day, they wanted romance and love. And I was looking through a lot of the Mills and Boon, a lot of which were taken out today. So this is just about the Mills and Boon that I spied being taken out in the first session of the mobile library. Spinning the carousel, a dizzying deluge of desire, the offer of sultry surgeons and dangerous dukes, jilted brides, scorching nights, temptations only sated in chapter 5. A daring PR proposal for an ice hockey team. A hot architect makes a landscape of steam somewhere near the granite grotto. A virgin widow, an irresistible Greek, a woman thought too meek for love. A playboy, untrustworthy in his leather driving gloves. Khalil finds some replacement queen. Oh, some books are saucy, but they're never obscene. All this passion available for free. Oh, hot romance with a cup of tea. Could anything be more English than love from the lending library? So there we go. That's and I do love any of you Mills and Boon readers. I am a huge fan of 1970s Mills and Boon in particular, and I know that some of you do love Mills and Boon, but you thought that might be a trap. There are no questions that are traps. I'd like to make that clear. I was in a holiday cottage and I found this book called Stormy Vigil, and it was about a lighthouse keeper who is sent an English student who he knew when they were younger, and how they don't get on over various different forms of crockery until, as I mentioned in that poem, till chapter 5. That was always the rule in 1970s Mills and Boon. No one would find romance, but at chapter 5, a moment which seemed so tempestuous would turn to love. And I loved reading these so much that I made a show which was me with a backing orchestra reading out from different Mills and Boon books. And then one day, this is kind of explaining, I like quite a few people in this world, I'm neurodivergent, and one of the reasons that I should have known was during the middle of that show, I was up at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and I saw a woman tap dancing. Her name was Jo. I'd never seen her before. She tap danced. It was the most wonderful tap dancing I'd seen. And afterwards, I just went straight up to her without any introduction. I went, "Hey Jo, my name's Robin. I absolutely love that tap dancing. I'm currently doing a show on the Edinburgh Fringe where I predominantly read out from 1970s Mills and Boon. Most of them set in kind of rural areas with farmers, but a couple about lighthouse keepers. And I'm also reading out 3 horror novels about giant killer crabs invading on the coast of Wales. And I loved your tap dancing so much that I felt it would really enhance both some of the romance near combine harvesters and also some of the giant killer crab attacks. Would you like to join in?" And she said yes. And 20 years later, we found out that's not a neurotypical way of starting a conversation. I love the creativity of books. I love the creativity of imagination. I love the way that books can take us to so many different places. I love libraries. As Carl Sagan said, libraries are a mark of civilization. That's why very often we have to battle for libraries. It's because they're seen as a luxury when the access to ideas should never be seen as a luxury. And it's unfortunately very often the kind of the small-minded people, and frequently those who are most drawn to power and politics, who cannot see the beauty of the library and its activities. So I've just got, this is the second poem about libraries that I ever wrote. This was for a library in Exeter for their 100th anniversary. The library, where people are quite free and they can safely be surrounded by all possibility and the friendliness of curiosity, where refugees can shoot the breeze and under threes learn ABCs and OAPs avoid the freeze. Here you'll find the keys to unlock knowledge of Ramesses and cottage cheese and Cherokees and Crohn's disease and Hercules and Pleiades, isosceles and vertices. But now, in parentheses, please do avoid late fees. So I love where I'm very lucky. My career, if it is a career, I don't think it is a career. It's a series of kind of accidents that come about because I say yes to a lot of things. And some of them have led me, for instance, into doing science broadcasting. So I do a radio series called The Infinite Monkey Cage, which we're nearly up to, I think, to episode 200 now. And it's always a joy because I get to meet minds that are so fizzy all the time and so excited. And sometimes when I wanted to mention something about Jane Goodall. I love Jane Goodall. I think Jane Goodall is one of the most remarkable scientists and had to fight a great deal. You know, she went out to Gombe, she found out new things about chimpanzees. She truly, in a revolutionary way, changed our understanding of what it was to be a chimpanzee and also what it was to be a human. And then she returned, in fact, to Cambridge. And immediately the kind of older male, they go, oh, well, you've done the science wrong. So even though she discovered things which no one else had discovered, they decided that because she hadn't followed the rules in their exact way, she was considered lesser. And she has continued battling for so many different things with such good humour. Indeed, her story of why she's fascinated with chimpanzees and animal communication begins in the library. I bet some of you will be able to guess this. Does anyone know what inspired Jane Goodall to eventually go out to the forest of Gombe and why she wanted to see if it was possible to communicate with chimpanzees? Does anyone guess? It was Dr. Dolittle, Hugh Lofting, because he talked to the animals. That will be another good example. Any of these books that take you to different places, that say, this is the world I'm in, but also I just read this book and I found out other people are in this world and other people have these experiences. And I think this is why, again, why the library is so important. The library is often the place, like for me as a school kid who did not enjoy school very much and wasn't really, the rough and tumble wasn't for me. The library was the safe place to be, but it was also an entry to so many other places. And that delight, and I think of, like Jane Goodall, I was lucky, we've had her on The Infinite Monkey Cage actually. We had her on with Bill Bailey, the brilliant comedian and musician. And Bill loves animals as well. And there was this wonderful moment where at one point Bill said to Jane Goodall, he said, Jane, if I was talking to a chimpanzee, I'd normally think I'd kind of start with, and Jane went, oh no, Bill, that would be a very, very bad start. What you need to start with a lot more is a kind of, and he went, oh, thanks very much. So, it's this beautiful, and both of them, again, it came from real curiosity. It was funny and it was delightful. And I was lucky, actually. I've met Jane on another occasion as well. Earlier this year, I was out in Slovakia doing it's a thing called Starmus. It's a celebration of both astronomy and music, because both of those things, I think, are things that can take us, we can have transcendent experiences when we hear beautiful music, when we look, like tonight is a beautiful night to look at the stars. I was just looking out the window when we were driving down here and I thought, what a clear night. And it doesn't matter, like when people were thinking, for instance, about when the aurora borealis is around, everyone looks up and goes, look, look, look. And I tell those people, look up every night, because every night there is a clear sky. You will see something beautiful. Like even this morning at 7 a.m, I'm changing trains at Milton Keynes Central, and I look out at the sky, and the sky was so purple. so purple with the dawn. And to see that and to experience and make sure we keep looking up, we keep looking around, we keep thinking. One of my favourite books of Charles Darwin's, possibly my favourite book, is a book called The Formation of Vegetable Mould Through the Action of Worms with Observation on Their Habits, right? And it's his shortest book as well, so that might be... Don't read his books on barnacles, right? Very big books on barnacles. I asked my friend Steve Jones, who is a geneticist and expert on snails, I said, are there any Charles Darwin books I shouldn't read? He said, don't read his books on barnacles. He became overly obsessed. But the Earthworms book is a beautiful book because it is Charles Darwin's final book. It is when Charles Darwin has explored so many intricate and tropical and exotic ideas of living creatures on this planet. And then in the final book, he starts to think about those earthworms that are so often under his feet as he walks around in Kent. And he starts to study the earthworm. Still, one of my favourite things is where he decides to do an experiment with the earthworms. He decides to see whether earthworms are able to hear. So he plays a penny whistle to an earthworm, right? But that doesn't seem to do anything, but he thinks, well, that's a penny whistle, I need to try other notes as well. And so he gets his son Leonard to play the bassoon to some earthworms, which still have no effect. And so then they take the earthworms inside and play the piano to the earthworms, right? This is also, by the way, how jazz was invented. But that to me is a beautiful thing. Here is a mind that isn't always just looking at the most exotic of animals. It's thinking about what we might consider to be mundane, the earthworm. And of course, like anything on this planet, anything that can seem mundane, if we keep looking, it becomes beautiful, and it becomes strange, and it becomes exotic. And so it was lovely to be out in Slovakia, and I met Patti Smith was there as well, and Laurie Anse, and all of these incredible people. And it really was like, I just looked around the room and I thought, oh, the number of thoughts and the number of ways that the people's minds in this room have helped change me as well. So this was a poem that I wrote for Jane Goodall. I'm off to Starmus in my Carl Sagan corduroy, to tattoo my mind with new questions and suggestions of how to be human, of how to be humane, to retrain my brain, but most importantly, to listen to Jane, who changed us, untrained. Unhampered by presumptions, she observed new ways to climb the branches of the tree of life, to dismiss our superiority, to show we have no privileged objectivity. We're not the pinnacle, but just a part. But we must take responsibility, for life is no frivolity. There is no perpetuity in all of this fragility. And if I have seen further, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of chimpanzees and started to see through windows that used to be closed to me. And that to me is one of the important things, again, which comes from reading, from asking questions, from the excitement of doubt, of well-used doubt, is this realisation, firstly, that we do not have a privileged position, that the way that we see this room is not superior to the way other species may experience the colours, may experience the sound. We have one way of experiencing the world, and I think it helps us also in understanding why sometimes the divisions that are being created so often, why they are unnecessary. You know, we are seeing what's happening in the United States of America at the moment, and I think it is kind of terrifying to see that level of, and I'm going to say it, of stupidity, of greed and cruelty. This denial of evidence-based thinking means that all of us have to work, I believe, far harder to be compassionate, to be kind, to be curious, to watch out for those who may well be pushed aside in this process. This, to me, again, is why if you read the books of James Baldwin is one of my favourite writers, poets, playwrights and activists. You may well have seen the footage of him debating in Cambridge in the 1960s. It's the most incredible footage of him and the eloquence with which he speaks, and the tragedy of it being that you could show that debate now with James Baldwin and it would be as relevant 60 years on as it is today. And that's why when I accessed James Baldwin's books, I started with James Baldwin merely because it was the only book in the shop that was 40 pence. I had my pocket money and there was a book called The Devil Finds Work, and it said it was about films. And I thought, I like films, I have 40 pence, I'm going to read this book. And then I read the book, and that was my introduction to one of the great activists of the 20th century and a great poet. And that's the thing as well, which is I love reading books where, sometimes you think, I don't think this book's for me. But you take the risk, and then you read it and you go, I am changed by reading this book. I was up in Belper, just outside Derby, and I went to a bookshop there called Dormouse Books. And the woman who runs it told me this story. She said, one day, basically I'll explain by the way, most of her fiction is by women. And, there are an enormous number of great female authors, whether we're talking about the Brontes, whether we're talking about Jane Austen, whether we're talking about Margaret Atwood, whether we're talking about Ursula K. Le Guin, whether we're talking about Elizabeth Bowen, whoever it might be. It turns out there's a lot of good stuff, right? And she said, sometimes, occasionally, I will get someone who comes in who makes a bit of a scene. She said one day, on a Saturday morning, a man came in, she described it, a man in very deliberate red trousers. And he took scant regard of the fiction section, just very quickly and went, I see you don't stock any books for white middle-aged men. And then stormed out. And I thought, what a remarkable thing. And she did, by the way, she had a copy of the letters of John le Carré. So it's like but what a remarkable thing to consider all of those authors out of bounds for you. Because they have, oh my God, but they've got 2 X chromosomes. I can't start reading a book by Ursula K. Le Guin. It might make me into a lady. It's like the joy of going into a mind that has had to experience what your life has not been, I think is a remarkable and beautiful thing. The next poem I'm going to do is, it's like one of my, I'm just going to tell you 2 things about reading as well, which when I used to do a talk to libraries a while ago, I used to have moments where people would be shocked, right? So I'm now going to do this to you, and I'm going to see if 2 years down the line, this is still shocking. So I've warned you now. The first time I ever said it was Sheffield Central Library. Beautiful library, Sheffield Central Library. It had all the librarians here will know about this situation. It started off with me listening to a man talking to one of the librarians going, yes, I think the book, as far as I remember, is about a fox that can talk. But it might not be a fox that can talk. It might be about a falcon that's got some kind of power. My wife wasn't very specific, right? And the librarian said, do not worry, we will find that book, right? And 4 hours later, I was leaving and I saw the librarian. I said, oh, that man who was asking for that book, did you find it? And she said, yes, we did. And there was neither a fox nor a falcon in it, right? But while I was talking that day, doing the first presentation of the day, at one point I just suddenly looked at the audience and said, oh, by the way, I should mention this, just because you've started a book, you don't have to finish it. And you can imagine there was a lot of someone, no, send the man away. And other people kind of went, no, but what if? And then it all kind of changed, and then this man came up to me afterwards and he went, you're right, aren't you? You're right. I've been stuck in the most interminable historical novel now for 3 weeks. It's enormous and turgid, and I'm beginning to dread going to bed. It means I have to read more of the bloody thing. Each night a page seems heavier than the page seen the night before. But I can just stop, can't I? I said, yes, you can. He went, oh, thank you. I feel free for the first time. And that, to me, is a very important thing about reading, which is there are your rules. You do not have, I think with so many things that we can learn at school, with so many ways that people learn to hate poetry, where so many people become fearful of mathematics or think that science is dull or that reading is some kind of chore with a tick box that says, well, I finished Ulysses, now infinite jest. And it's not that. You make your own rules. And for me personally, I will buy a book and I go, oh, I can't wait to read this. And then I'll get to page 40 and there'll be a new thought in my head which spins me to another book. And then another book. And then another book. And so very often, sometimes people say, how do you read so many books? And I said, because I've finished very few of them. Not out of not enjoying them, but my mind is moving at a kind of speed of ideas that go, I need to know about something else. Whereas other people, I totally understand why if you start a book, you have to finish it. But make sure you never find it like, oh, this is really boring me, because it's a waste of your time. So always make sure you are finding delight, curiosity and wonder. But I wanted to mention trees briefly. I'm going to talk about it because I could make a segue, because of course books are made from trees, but it's got nothing to do with that. So I was very lucky on the Infinite Monk Cage. We had Judi Dench on one of the shows back in June. And Judi Dench was in no way disappointed. Judi Dench was exactly what you hoped Judi Dench would be like, right? And our producer kept going, when Dame Judy's here, do remember, make sure both Brian and you are here to greet Dame Judy. And there was Dame Judy, and eventually she went on like this. I said, you do know she's not actually Queen Victoria, don't you? You do know she's going to be pretty relaxed about this. And I think Judi Dench is, like Jane Goodall as well, one of those great examples of the absolute nonsense we're always told about generational divides. You know, oh, they're the boomer generation, or they're Gen X, they're Gen Y, they're Gen Z. None of that to me makes any sense. I think you have people who are excited and curious and kind and wonderful, and you have people who are boring and cruel, and there is no moment where you go, it was in 1969 where the boring and cruel starts to be born, or it was in 1980. It's like when people say, yeah, the thing that worries me about kids, right, is they do spend so much time on their screens, right? And I'll turn to people my age and go, do you remember we used to watch the test card? They're actually watching us. We would just watch. We used to watch teletext, right? So don't suddenly go, oh, whereas we were very pure children, mainly reading Plato. No, we weren't. Anyway, so I think, and in fact, one of the things I love about Judi Dench is she loves rude jokes, right? I'm not going to tell you the rudest one, because I know this is a library. But there was, and so I said to my producer, I said, oh, she loves rude jokes. She went, do not tell Dame Judy any rude jokes. And of course, she turned up and I told her some rude jokes and we got on like a house on fire, right? So this was one of the rude jokes I told her. Barry Cryer used to ring her up every week to tell her a joke. And then he'd go, bye, Judy, and that was it. And I said, Judy, do you remember the last joke that Barry Cryer ever told? And she went, oh, I can't remember what it was. And this was the last joke Barry Cryer ever told. So a couple are walking down the street and they look across the road and the wife goes, oh my goodness, that's the Archbishop of Canterbury. Have a look. And the husband goes, doesn't look like him. She goes, go over, go on, check, ask him. So he crosses the road, he stops this man and says, I'm so sorry, but can I just ask, are you the Archbishop of Canterbury? And the man says, fuck off. And then he walks back across the road and his wife says, well, what did he say? And he says, well, he just said, fuck off. She goes, oh, suppose we'll never know then. So, it's not the rudest one. But what I loved, again, about this is what I think is beautiful about the more stories you have. I was talking with Darren about this. You know, when people talk about 6 degrees of separation, the truth of it is, it's very hard to get to 6 degrees. If you've got enough stories in your mind, you find out there are 3 degrees of separation, 2 degrees, and that is part of that. Like my friend Alan Moore from Northampton, who is an amazing writer, was predominantly known in the past for incredible comic books, and then wrote a book about Northampton, which is longer than the Old Testament, right? It's a huge book, and it is filled with the most incredible... So when he was once asked, when someone said to Alan why he'd written a book so long, he said, so only the strongest can critique me, which I think is a great thing, right? And Alan's mind is such a fertile space. And when you finish reading Jerusalem, when you walk through Northampton, the air feels viscous. because suddenly there are so many stories. He has led, I'm sure, wherever you may live. I mean, Cambridge actually is a good example. I remember one time doing the Science Festival in Cambridge, and I was the last one out of the bar. It was midnight, and it was a Sunday, and everywhere was silent. And I walked across that market square, and as I did so, I just got this brief vision of hundreds and hundreds of cyclists of the last 150 years, all just overlaid on each other, almost like ghosts. Some of them there in their gowns, and some of them perhaps from the 1860s, some of them, looking a little bit like Ludwig Wittgenstein, some of them being 21st century students. And I know it wasn't ghosts, but I had that moment where my brain just thought, how many people have cycled along this street? How many ideas have cycled down this street? And that's what I think, again, we get, is that moment when you can, like, I went to the Outer Hebrides, was the penultimate gig that I did before lockdown. The final gig I did before lockdown ended up with me trying to explain black holes to Ed Miliband. So it was a good final gig in terms of being quite absurdist. And but the night, so I'm at the Stones of Callanish, and the Stones of Callanish, has anyone been to the Stones of Callanish? I found it a very, very moving and profound time. How did you find it?
I mean, I was 6 at the time, so I was maybe disappointed that it wasn't the climbing frame my parents.
I wish I hadn't brought you into the conversation. You've ruined it. No, I understand if you're 6, you're entirely right. But if you go back now, you will still get told off for climbing on the stones, because I can see you're very naughty. But I was lucky. It was the only sunny day in February, right? It had poured with rain for the first 24 days of February. It rained for the last 3 days of February, but on the 25th of February, it was a beautiful sunny day, and I stood alone in the middle of the Stones of Callanish. And in the middle there is a thing called the hand stone, because it's shaped a little bit like the hand, which I didn't know at the time. But I looked at it and I felt, you're allowed to do this, I just wanted, because the rock is this kind of Genesian rock, which sparkles in the sunlight, and as the sun keeps the different crystals sparkling, it's almost like the shape of the stones themselves change. And I couldn't resist but just put my hand onto this stone. And as I did that, I got this sense of thinking about everyone else who had stood exactly where I had stood, connecting with that stone. Some of them in bare feet, some of them in sandals or shoes made out of rabbit fur, some of them in great big hiking boots, some of them looking out towards sailing boats on the sea, some of them with many gods in the sky, some of them with no gods in the sky. And that moment, I thought, was one of those things where I didn't find it like mystical. I thought it's the kind of mysticism that comes when, so some people will say, oh, there's an energy that comes off this stone, and that's what you're seeing. But what I think can happen in those situations, me personally, is that at that moment of connection, it's like all of the different ideas and stories and reading that I'd had in my head, it's almost like they shoot out of my arm, get to the rock and bounce back in and create all of those different visions to play with, all of those different stories that are there. And it's like, I have a friend called Carlos Frank, and Carlos is a cosmologist, a brilliant human being. And I was surprised when he once told me that he believed in God, because I kind of felt, but he's a cosmologist, he's not going to believe in God. And we got talking about it. And it was so interesting seeing how he turned, like if someone says to you, sometimes people feel, and I'm not going to ask anyone here about their own faith or religion, but sometimes if someone says to you, do you believe in God or not? And someone says, I believe in God, and they go, oh, and that's the end of the conversation. But of course, God is so many different things to so many different people. And to Carlos, right, he was telling me about, and I said, oh, that's really fascinating. He said, no, and I said, so are you saying you believe in a kind of a God? He said, no, I definitely believe in an idea of God starting whatever then creates the laws of physics that creates the universe. And he said, but I should tell you this, Robin, that even though I believe in God, I do not allow him into the laboratory. Which I thought was a beautiful thing for, this being that is considered to be omniscient and omnipresent. The fact that Carlos gets to the door of the lab, goes, You wait there. I'm God. No, you stay there. Go and amuse yourself. Go to Richard Dawkins' study and move around his Ammonite. Anyway, so, but I just, sorry, I was going to say I'm waffling on, but you knew that. This is one of the problems I have, is that when I'm tired, and I also have ADHD, the idea of any linear narrative is just very, very unlikely. In fact, I was doing a poetry night the other night, and someone complained afterwards. They went, I was very confused when you did your poem about Just Stop Oil, because you literally introduced the idea and then immediately read the poem. And it was the only time where there was a route directly from an introductory sentence to the actual theme of and it actually became more confusing than when you're confusing. So anyway, so Judi Dench, one of the things that she does is she plants trees in memory of those that have gone, of those that she'd loved. People like her husband, Michael Williams, Natasha Richardson, Ian Richardson, and we spent a lot of time talking about trees. And I think it is, like with Brian Cox, one of the arguments we'll sometimes have is if I bring up ghosts, right? And Brian will go, ghosts don't exist. They break the second law of thermodynamics, right? And I say to him that ghosts do exist. They might not exist due to the laws of physics, but they exist in our imagination. So that is what, like for me, my dad died last April. I used to spend a lot of time with my dad in bookshops and so many discussions. And the last few years of his life, when he couldn't get out, I would often, when I was on tour, I would find books to ring him up about. To say, I've just found this book, would you like it? To have a conversation with him. And now, 18 months later, when I'm browsing in bookshops, the ghost of him is there. The memory of him remains. It might, I'm not saying that, and that to me is a beautiful thing. I think for all of us, how hopeful we might be that we leave behind that ghost of a memory, that there is someone who knows us and loves us, and there will be certain things they do where we appear in their mind again. And I think Judy's thing of planting trees is very beautiful, because I think that thing where sometimes when you see something growing out of a grave, and you see the life that is coming from the grave. You think of all of those beautiful stories of those atoms. Some of those atoms will have come from whoever may be beneath the ground. And the planting of the trees, again, creates a personal relationship with something of nature, which is also a connection to her, to Michael, or to Ian, or to Natasha, or whoever else. So this was a poem that I wrote for her after we did this show. She talks of oak and yew and ash, how woods evoke the personalities of those both gone, and in the trees, alive. How branch and bark and leaf and sap can be heard to flow, and mycorrhizal networks yap. You see, nothing is still. In Nunhead Cemetery, out of a sun-starved tomb, a tree has found the room to shatter the mason's art. Struck free, the grave now falls apart. Long gone names, the dates eroded, moss thrives, branches climb. 6 feet under, maybe more. Anonymous atoms under graveyard floor still feed the branches, trees and leaves. You see, in death, you can still achieve. Even the hellbound have something reaching heavenward. Let me, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Right, this is a poem. I mentioned about the Just Stop Oil thing. And was anyone here? It's always a long shot, but it was the biggest march that has been in London this year, which was the Restore Nature Now march. Was anyone on that march? You there? It was a great march, wasn't it?
Yeah, fantastic.
It was the exuberance of the march, the delight, the fact that also basically it was the National Trust and Extinction Rebellion marching arm in arm, right? And obviously some of you will know, you will remember from last year's newspapers that the National Trust is now considered to be an extremist left-wing organisation. Many people say more left-wing than the Lifeboat Association. And So there was this marching together, and do you remember the moment, did you bump into the march that was coming in the opposite direction? Right, this was the great thing, right? So one thing that was beautiful was it was such a disparate group of people, such a wonderfully done, so many different interests in the importance of nature, and there were so many placards, hand-painted placards, incredible costumes, these big butterflies floating around, and then halfway through the march, we bumped into a march coming in the opposite direction. And sometimes that can be a terrible moment. Oh no, not that march. But this time it was the London Lesbian March. And everyone was just like, hooray, hooray! Everyone cheered each other back and forth. The London Lesbian March, one of them shouted, why didn't you tell us you were doing it this week? We could have joined you and we'd have done ours next week, right? It was filled with that kind of energy and exuberance. And all of the cliches we're told, again, these generational cliches, you know, the Tweedy people, we were meant to imagine were going, well, I've been enjoying the march when it was about the Soil Association, but now it's there are so many, it's rather put me off all these lesbians. Of course, that isn't what happened at all. Everyone's going, oh, look, it's the London lesbians are marching. Your great aunt was a lesbian, wasn't she? She was. I mean, we didn't know. She did the most wonderful topiary. And it was only when we got on a drone and we looked down, we realised there was a message. And she knew Vita Sackville West. She did. And it was like, and again, it was filled with, and this is what annoys me so much. We have had 2 days, maybe 3 now, on the Farmers' March, which was a much smaller march than the Restore Nature Now March. There was no reporting from the BBC on the Restore Nature March, even though it was a march that was enormous and filled, this is its problem, it was filled with joy and love. And as we know, our media doesn't like joy and love. And it means that we sometimes feel shyer about joy and love because anger is, and that is what I felt about that march. And I met someone from the BBC when I was at Glastonbury. I was chatting with a guy who was some science correspondent. I went, were you on the march? He went, no, I wasn't. And I have been getting quite a lot of flack from people. And I went, yes, you should. And this is one of the reasons that the BBC don't always like me working for them. So, I wish that was a lie. Now I'm going to see if I can find the poem. I've built this poem up. I was determined to go directly from one thing to another, and now it turns out that I've printed out far too many of them, and you might get one about either tooting instead, late night flowers, or a den. Right, I know it's here somewhere. Ah, there it is, right at the bottom. So, this is called Soup. An iceberg crumbles, a species dies, a glacier retreats, the world fries. So humdrum this destruction. The fires that rage don't make the front page, fail to stir a paid opinion, the artless typist waiting for something to be truly pissed about. And the complexity of life and their own companionship with capitalism, well, it just doesn't drip ink. It doesn't lubricate the pen. But then, soup. 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 The whoops of easy outrage for soup on sunflowers, broth on Van Gogh. Oh, it's like Vimto on a Vermeer, custard on a Klimt, lasagna on a Leonardo, or trifle on a Turner, meringues and mango mousse on a Modigliani, pot noodles at a Pissarro. What next? Throwing feces at masterpieces? Black Forest Gatto on a Gauguin is worse than the deforestation of the Amazon. Celery soup on a Sisley is worse than sewage in the Severn. Placing pate on a Picasso, well, it's worse than pesticidal genocide. The ability to regrow a rainforest or rebuild an atmosphere may take more effort than wiping Vegemite off of Vermeer or waffles off a Warhol, which I think he probably quite likes. Has a kind of pop art sensibility to that. But remember, it is better to butcher a planet than bouillabaisse a Basquiat. So, there we are. Right, let's do... I'm going to do one that I wrote about... This is about mental health. And this is about... I think there's so many people... And that's where, I think, you know, so many people are battling, so many people are silent, so many people... I did a show called Reality Tunnel a while ago, and the first episode was about kind of how my mind works, and it's probably, of anything that I've done, had the biggest reaction in terms of people sending me personal messages. And one of the things was I got a message from a 67-year-old man who said, I have always believed there was something wrong with my brain. It keeps making so many kind of erratic things up and it dots around to so many different ideas, and I've spent my life trying to keep quiet and trying to just say as little as possible, just thinking that I am the only one and that I am a freak. He said, but then I listened to your radio show and I found out I'm not the only one. There might be many of us. And if there aren't many of us, at least I now know there are two of us, right? And I think there are so many people who are not able to, like, I used to have a lot of anxiety. Till 3 years ago, my life was, even though you wouldn't know it, if you listen to Infinite Monkey Cage or whatever, you wouldn't know that during every single recording, while I was saying everything I was saying, my mind was also going, that was useless, that was terrible, you're ruining the show, why are you doing that? Oh my God, that was the wrong question. I think someone's misinterpreted that question. Oh no, that was how it went. And very often I think I better send an email and leave the show because it just didn't work out right. That was how my mind would begin at the beginning of the day. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd think, what did I do wrong yesterday? Who have I alienated? What am I going to do wrong today? Is that person looking at me because I've done something bad? And that was how I, like, a good example would be, I went to a bakery in the town that I live in, and I was just buying some baked goods, and I was with a friend. I said, would you like anything? He said, I don't really know what most of these things are. I said, well, let me run you through that. I said, that's an ice bun, that's a Belgian bun. I said, that's sometimes known as a Danish bun, that's a cream bun, that's a currant bun, that's a hot cross bun, which is very much like you. I went through all of them. And at the end of it went, wow, you know the names of every single one. And I said, yes, I do. I certainly know my buns. But there was quite a young woman behind the counter, and immediately I went, oh my God, what if she thinks I'm one of those older men who says things like, I certainly know my buns, and I don't just mean baked goods, I mean women's bottoms as well, right? Which is not what I was meaning at all. I really was meaning I'm, quite confident in my incredible ability to name all baked goods. But because of that, I didn't go back to that bakery ever. But that's how it used to be till about 2.5, 3 years ago. And I was talking with my friend Stuart Hennigan, who has written the most wonderful book called Ghost Signs about poverty in Leeds, and I would really recommend it. He's a librarian as well. And as I was saying to Darren, I've never met a cruel librarian. Has anyone met a cruel librarian? I've not. So, if they are, they're very much an outlier within the librarian community. But Stuart and I were talking, in fact it was when I was coming back from Slovakia, we were sending messages to each other. It was about 7 in the morning, and he is someone who's sometimes battled with depression, and he talked about the dark angels. So I wrote this poem for Stuart. Finally, I clipped the wings of the dark angels that had fluttered for so long like moths in the last lone light of night. Once it was black, they'd always appear, invisible but ever-present. They beat their wings against the cooling bulb. Only I could hear the flapping, but I denied there was a sound for fear of showing weakness. But then, one day, now in middle age, I found the way to quieten down the relentlessness. I exposed them by speaking up aloud, uncowed, not unafraid, but less afraid. Not bold, but bolder. Speaking out, they tumbled and twirled like maple seeds spinning to the woodland floor. Not banished or vanished, but unfed, underfoot and famished. So nearly vanquished. They might still flutter at my heels, but however hard they try, they won't carry me away anymore. That's all right for you. I'm gonna... how much longer have I got? I mean that actually, not just now, I mean generally. What time is it? 15 minutes, right. I'm going to rattle through, I'm going to do one about this. I've just come back from doing a horror movie festival. It's in Aberystwyth, and it's called Abertoir. And how great is that, right? And I love going there because it is filled, again, with such a diverse group of people. And a lot of the people, when they were kids, They didn't find, the joy of school. They found it difficult, and it reminds me of the fact that when I was a kid, I loved Doctor Who. Doctor Who was such an important thing to me, and then it was horror movies. I'd never seen a horror movie, but I had a book called Horror Movies by Alan Frank, which I bought with my 8th birthday money, right? And I would look at these images of Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and Edward Woodward in The Wicker Man, looking at the Hand of Glory, and I would make up those films. I would think from that one picture, and then The Frozen Dead, which is about a group of Nazis that get frozen, and then they're going to be thawed in the swinging 60s to spoil Carnaby Street, right? So I would look at these and imagine them, and then many of the films I would see 20 or 30 years later, and what I normally found out was that my imagination had a much bigger budget than the studios, right? But what I loved about horror movies for me was the otherness of them. I'm a huge fan of the actor Ernest Thesiger, who, if anyone knows the film The Old Dark House or Bride of Frankenstein, he's Dr. Pretorius. Have a gin, it's my only weakness. And he's this wonderful, very delicate, skeletal-looking man. Worked with Olivier, a keen embroiderer as well. And he also fought on the Western Front. And whenever people found that out, they would be astonished, because there they would see this rather camp, reasonably for that time, openly gay man, and they go, "Good Lord, Ernest, I just found out. You fought on the Western Front. What on earth was that like?" And he would just go, "The people." And the noise. So it's like he had this wonderful, and he had that otherness that James Whale films brought. Peter Cushing is another one that I think has a beautiful delicacy about him. I love Peter Cushing. I love his first volume of autobiography has this wonderful story where he talks about how he first discovered death. And he discovered about the idea of death because if he was naughty, his mother would punish him by pretending to be dead in a chair, right? Do not do this. This is very bad parenting, right? But he said, if I was naughty, and I often was, my mother would start to sing a song about travelling over the ocean. And I go, "Oh no, Mummy, please don't die. I promise to be good." But then I'd be naughty, and Mummy would just sit in the chair, being very dead. And my brother used to come in and go, "Don't be so silly, Peter. You know she's not dead. Kick her, shove her," which I couldn't because it was Mummy. And then one day when she was being particularly dead, I was so upset and I had a piece of jam and bread in my hand and I just shoved it in her face and she never did it again. And I love things like that, and so these films, even though I didn't actually see them, and like reading, Edgar Allan Poe, reading the Pan Book of Horror Stories, the Fontana Book of Ghost Stories, all of those things took me to different places of a different kind of fear. So this is a little poem about that time, and it's called The Happy Sofa. I'm safe here. Safe behind the sofa, secure behind the stuffing and ready for Karloff shuffling and werewolves snuffling and the muffled cries of another poish bride, walled in, hung up, tied down, ready to be severed as the pendulum swings. You see here, my dear, my fear has an off button. I can be cosy with Lugosi. I can commit to Ingrid Pitt. I can feel the chill with Lionel Atwill. I can shout, "It's alive!" with Colin Clive. I can feel sorry for Peter Lorre or eat a fly with Dwight Fry. I can be a creeper with Rondo, and I can hide the bloodstains of Claude Rains as they redden the snow. I'll fight a ravenous eel for Barbara Steele. I'll visit a morgue in Manchester for the hand of Elsa Lanchester. I'll scream like a coffin-encased banshee for just one word from Christopher Lee. And I ain't messing you when I tell you I'll embroider with Ernest Thesiger. But then the truly terrifying. The screen turns black. The end of the monster's ball. And I'm back. Back where the bullies rule and the off button is always on. And I wish I was on. And I wish I was gone. Gone to the place that I am free, hiding happily behind the settee. Right, I'll do two quick ones, and then we'll throw it out to questions. This is about another one. This is my final library poem for the day. I went to Indianapolis. I was very lucky. I literally had an afternoon in Indianapolis before I had a chance to, then had to go and do a show, and then I was on a tour bus. But in that time off that I had, I went to the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library, right? And it's I was touring with Brian Cox, and people often say, how come you look so much older than Brian Cox when he's actually a year older than you? And I explained the reason is because he has a sleep every afternoon, and wherever I get to, I run around the city excitedly. And therefore, by changing the speed of my own movement, this has accelerated my age. So, this is, don't look at the physics in that, it doesn't entirely work. So the Kurt Vonnegut Library was such a joy. Kurt Vonnegut is a writer that I love. There were so many beautiful things there. One of the most beautiful things actually was when Kurt Vonnegut went to war, his father sent him a letter, but the letter arrived at the camp after Vonnegut had been sent to Germany. And when Vonnegut survived the war and got home, his father said, I wrote you this letter. And he gave it to Kurt Vonnegut, and Kurt Vonnegut decided never to open the letter. So he just kept it sealed, and his son Mark inherited the letter, and he too has decided never to open the letter. And it is in a glass cabinet, just in a little case, this sealed letter. And I think, that is a very beautiful thing. And it's not also, this is a very important thing, it's not just about Kurt Vonnegut, the museum. It's about so many other authors of the past and also authors of the future. There is a huge amount of area to sit and write in. Now, this is, again, one of the reasons I think libraries are so important. There are many people who live a life where they have no space at all. And they're in small areas, they might not have any form of garden, they have nowhere where they can go off to write or create or just experience the quiet. This is, Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. And that's another thing that the library gives you. The library gives you a space to be. And I think that's a very important thing. And it's very important when we have to fight even harder to make sure we have true diversity in the arts. It's getting harder and harder for people from working class backgrounds to be in the arts, for instance. And I think part of that is if you don't have the space. And so this amazing thing as well that was there was a wall of all the banned books, right? Incredible list of, so all of Kurt Vonnegut's books were there, but so were the books of Maya Angelou and Octavia Butler and Ursula Le Guin and Lenny Bruce and William Burroughs and some of Margaret Atwood. It was all there. And it made me think about banned books more often than not are not the books that narrow your vision. They're the books that broaden your vision, and that is why they're a threat. That's why Maya Angelou was perceived as a threat. That is why Toni Morrison is still the most banned author in the United States of America. And so I just wrote this poem thinking about this. Standing in the Vonnegut Library, I think of an insanity. That the right to bear arms is so often supported by those who believe in the right to ban books. The necessity of weaponry sits with the insistence of believing you mustn't see a word of To Kill a Mockingbird, that Toni Morrison is a greater threat than a Beretta, that it's better to be slaved than to be gay, better to live The Handmaid's Tale than to read it. Handguns, not trans-spun stories. As Lenny said, they'd rather outlaw love than violence, rather silence progress. Better to own anti-personnel than anti-racist, baby. Better flowers on a grave than flowers for Algernon. Better firearms than the fire next time. But I say no. We must demand Baldwin over bullets. Better reading than bleeding. To be better read than to be dead. I'll do one final poem. This is a poem that I wrote for Tim Brooke Taylor. I was very lucky. I worked with Tim Brooke Taylor on a few occasions. Again, he's like Judi Dench and all the other Jane Goodall. I was not in any way disappointed when I met. Every time, Graham Garden summed him up so perfectly and beautifully. A friend of his since they were students, and he just said of Tim, he just said he was a class act, and he really was. And I was very lucky because It was, 2000 and, what year was lockdown? 2020? Was that right? Yeah, 2020, February 2020. I did a show with all three of the goodies. We did a 50th anniversary show at the Redgrave Theatre in Bristol, and it was a celebration of them, and the public had voted for their favourite episode, and the goodies wouldn't know until that night, and then I would reveal the episode, and the goodies with 500 people in that theatre would watch that episode. And a beautiful thing happened, that the episode that won was an episode which all three of the goodies cannot stand and have never wanted to see again. So they then sat in the theatre with Bill Oddie every now and again going, "That bit's a bit racist, did you write that, Graham?" So, but it was a very joyous celebration, and I was very lucky that I did 3 events with Tim that weekend. One of the ones we did was about Marty Feldman, the great writer and comic and actor Marty Feldman, and there was a beautiful moment at one point where when Tim came in, and I said, "Oh, by the way, Tim, have you read Marty Feldman's autobiography?" He said, "No." And he turned to his wife and went, "Do you know about that?" She went, "No." And he was very, very close friends with Marty Feldman. I said, "I know why you don't know about it." I said, "Because it only got recently published." So Marty Feldman died, nearly 40 years, well, over 40 years ago now. But when he died, his wife decided she could not look at anything that he'd written. She could look at photos of Marty, but not his writing, because the Martiness of Marty was too intense in those words. And this is also, I want to say to all of you, some of you might write anyway, some of you might not, some of you might think, what's the point? Please write whenever you can, or record your stories, or anything that you want to say, because we are this incredibly rare species. We are a species that can leave behind what I would sometimes call the fossils of our mind. The thoughts that we've had. Behind us in this library, there are books by those who are living, and there are books by those that are dead. And in those books, we find some of the life of that human being. And very often I think I meet people and they say, "I haven't got a story," or "Nothing interesting's ever happened to me." And that has never, ever been true. Every conversation, when I've sometimes gone out for a beer with people afterwards and they've been explaining how boring their life is, they always tell me something and I'll say, "That is an interesting story." Because what happens is all of our stories become boring because we carry them with us all the time. I wrote about, I wasn't going to talk about this, but I will, I hope you don't mind. But in a book I wrote a while ago called "I'm a Joker, So Are You," I wrote about a car accident I was in 3 days before my 3rd birthday. And in this car accident, my mum was nearly killed. It wasn't her fault, by the way. There was a car speeding on the wrong side of the road. It crashed into us. She was in a coma. She was very badly injured and would have died had it not been for my dad shouting at the ambulance men, because the ambulance men were going to take her to just the local general hospital. And my dad somehow knew and said, "If she goes there, she will die." And later on we were told she would have died. And when she returned home some months later, my sisters were both shocked. They were older than me, because she was different. She was a different human being. And some of these things I didn't put in that book, because at that point my dad was still alive. And my dad did things, again, that importance of us keeping other people's stories going, the importance of having ghosts, right? Something I want to share with you now about my dad is, I never knew this till after my dad had died, but my dad was told a few months after my mum's accident, when she was still pretty much insane, he was just told, "You just should put her in a home and forget about her." And that would never have even crossed his mind. And he never did that. And it meant that eventually she was able to have a reasonably full life, still battling with depression. And those things, and I wrote about the first part of that. And I wrote about the fact that because I was nearly 3 years old, and because I was in the car, I thought I'd caused the crash. Because when you're little and you do something and it's got nothing to do with the thing that suddenly caught fire over there or fell off that shelf, but you think it was your fault. So I wrote about that, and I wrote about that experience, and then I didn't really want to put it in the book because I thought it's a boring story, and I know how many worse things friends of mine have, and the editor said, "You've got to keep that in the story." And then the number of conversations that I had from the moment I started to read that bit of the book out loud to people, from when I would sometimes tell that story. And I realised that by sharing it, not only has it, and it's helped my sisters and me a great deal. I also want to tell you another beautiful thing, which is I was talking about it a while ago, and I've not spoken about it for a long time. I was up at Mount Florida Books in Glasgow. And I was, when suddenly you don't think, you can feel that you're about to be emotionally kind of, spun around. And that's what happened. Suddenly I started talking about it and I had to stop. Because I was like, whoa, the emotional impact is really... And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, sorry, I'm just going to have to take a moment. And there's a pause. And then a man at the back said, you take as long as you need. And those moments, and that's what we need more of. We need, and I could see that he was going through something as well, and I just walked to the back, and I gave him a hug, and then I walked back, and then we continued the talk. But all of those moments of us sharing our fragility, are moments where we become truly strong, I think. So that's what I want to say, is do share your stories, tell your stories, write poetry, do whatever you can. And don't think about the audience it's for, just think about what have I got in my mind. I'd like to, because one of the very important things about writing, I think, as well, is I often find when I like the book that I've just written, when I was writing it, it was only by writing it that I understood some of the things about myself. Because when your life, when everything's just there, it's chaos. But if you put something into a paragraph, it's still a bit chaotic, but you've given it shape and form, and you can hold that paragraph and you can read that. But in the same way, my diagnosis of the neurodivergence, what happened to me there was that I still had all the useful chaos of my mind, but now I had a box around my mind. So the chaos could only get so far before it bounced off a surface, and no longer was I as lost as I was before. So this has taken us some way away from Marty Feldman, but now we return to that. And so Marty Feldman, this is what happened, right? His wife put all the beautiful writing up in the attic, and she said to a friend, I don't want it coming down when I'm alive, but the moment I'm dead, you go up there and you find out what can be shared. Whatever you wish. And the friend went up and found screenplays and scripts and jokes, and then found a folder that said autobiography. And so they took it to a publisher, and it's now published. It's published as I, Marty, E-Y-E Marty. And at the end, it's a beautiful story, I, Marty. You've read it, of course, haven't you, Darren Houston? And it's beautiful because it's filled with love. It's filled with two loves in particular. The love for his wife and his love for comedy. Comedy was really important to him, and his love. And there's a beautiful story at the end. At the end, there's a little afterward about the day he died. He had a heart attack. And Graham Chapman from Monty Python was trying to keep him alive with CPR. And Graham Chapman remembered that one of the final things Marty Feldman ever said was, please tell my wife that I'm so glad that I met her. Because it meant I never had to put my thing in anyone else. Now that, as a final line, I think is very strong. I think the fact that he both wishes, in all sincerity, to say how much he loves his wife, but also he goes, but I'm also a comedian, so a little bit of blue right at the end. Now I think that is, so this poem that I wrote was, I was thinking of Tim, I was thinking about the fact that goodies made it easier for me to be alive when I was a child. Just in the same way with Doctor Who and all those other things. And I thought of other people I'd met, someone we were talking about earlier, Darren, Neil Innes from the Ruttles and the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. I met him on a few occasions. And I thought of all of the people that made my life better. And the older I've become, the less fearful I am of saying to them, can I just tell you, your work's really important, or I love your work, or will you sign my book, or whatever it might be. That those things, we find it much easier to go, I sort of think you saw that, I didn't think it was very good actually, the thing he did. People find it quite easy to do that, but people get worried about saying, I really love your work. So this is about the fact that I feel very fortunate that I had that opportunity. Let me celebrate you now, as you stand before me, while you can still hear the cheer. Don't let me wait until you're gone to be fond. Don't let the fear of embarrassment stifle my delight. How the worry of impending shame leads us to talk about love only when there can be no response. Derision is easy to dispense and a brickbat easy to receive, an acknowledgement of what our self-loathing knew already. We fumble and blush when praised or when praising, waiting to be caught out, rejected. I love their mind. I love their voice. I loved them. Past tense. It's hard not to fear the present, hard to be present, hard not to bend under a cynic stare, but keep the volume of things unsaid, the regrets of silence, as thin as they can be. Let them take up little space on the shelf in your head. Don't be ashamed of your joy. Don't hide your love for so long that it turns to dust. And all of this, I said, in my head, as you walk by. But not anymore. Not anymore. I love the bones of you. Thank you very much.